Hello and welcome back to the Electronic Intifada's live stream for Wednesday, September 25th. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleagues Ali Abunimah, Jon Elmer, Asa Winstanley, and Tamara Nassar. It's day 355 of Israel's genocide in Gaza. We're now streaming on Twitch, Rumble, Twitter, X, Facebook, and Instagram. So wherever you're watching us from, thanks for joining us. Coming up, we'll have a discussion with our contributor, Yousef Aljamal, who's the editor of the forthcoming book, If I Must Die, Poetry and Prose, an anthology of Refaat Alareer's writing about teaching, literature, politics, and family. We'll talk about the projects he's working on to keep Refaat's legacy alive. Later on in the program, Jon will take us through the latest from the battle in Rafah and the expanding war between Hizballah and Israel. But first, here's a summary of some of the latest developments in Gaza, the West Bank, and Lebanon. In Gaza, Israeli airstrikes and quadcopter drone attacks killed approximately 40 people on Tuesday alone in Beit Lahia, Jabalia, Rafah, Khan Yunis, Burej refugee camp, and Nuseirat refugee camp. In Nuseirat, homes were flattened and people were killed as Israeli tanks pounded the area. Our contributor Abu Bakr Abed said that according to residents in Nuseirat, Israeli snipers and quadcopters have been operating on the western edge of the camp. Video footage, which we will not display here, shows mangled bodies laying in pools of blood on the street and people screaming over the bodies of children. At least 11 people were killed in the attacks. The attacks come just a day after Israel bombed 2 schools turned into shelters for displaced people in Nuseirat and in the beach refugee camp, killing at least 10, including children. The Gaza government media office said that the attacks, quote, come within the framework of the crime of genocide, as the number of shelters bombed by the occupation reached 183, including 163 schools, housing hundreds of thousands of displaced persons. On Saturday, Israel carried out a massacre on the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 school in Gaza City, killing at least 22 Palestinians. The Gaza government media office stated that most of those killed were women and orphaned children who had sought shelter in the school. The UN Agency for Palestine Refugees stated that, quote, in Gaza, schools are no longer places of joy. They have been turned into rubble or overcrowded places of refuge for displaced families living in fear. Children deserve to study in schools, not to have to shelter in them. It is high time to restore education in Gaza. The Geneva-based Euromed Human Rights Monitor has published an extensive report on the ongoing health, humanitarian, economic, agricultural, and psychological effects of Israel's deliberate destruction of electricity lines, generators, and solar panels in Gaza for almost a full year now. Euromed says that the cutting off of electricity to Gaza over 11 and a half months, quote, has had catastrophic effects and long-lasting humanitarian repercussions, affecting every aspect of residents' lives. The subjection of over 2 million individuals to deplorable living conditions by Israel, including cutting off their electricity, is a tool of its ongoing genocide against the Palestinian people. Many of the hundreds of thousands of Gaza Strip residents who are compelled to light wood fires in place of using cooking gas and electricity to cook and carry out daily tasks have already started to experience respiratory and vision issues that will likely have long-term or permanent effects on their health. A new investigation by Defense for Children International Palestine has revealed that Israeli forces used Palestinian children as human shields during the siege of Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City in April. The group's field researchers in Gaza spoke with 2 Palestinian families who, along with their young children, were forced to walk alongside Israeli tanks as Israeli forces besieged Al-Shifa Hospital. Israeli forces have regularly used Palestinian children as human shields during the genocide in Gaza, according to documentation they've collected. Quote, on April 18th, Israeli forces surrounded the area near Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City with tanks, military bulldozers, and ground forces. The tanks fired toward a building opposite the hospital where Ahed and Tagrid were sheltering with their 5 children. Tala, 12, Ahmed, 11, Yazan, 8, and twins Amir and Jude, 1. Ahed and Tagrid raised white flags and shouted civilians. Tala, the 12-year-old girl, told Defense for Children International Palestine, quote, they put me, my mother, and my brothers in the middle of the tanks and kept shooting over our heads while the bulldozer was bulldozing around us. We were afraid to die. I was calling for my mother who was next to me, but my voice couldn't come out. Israeli forces detained the family for over 5 hours without food or water before they ordered them to move south. The month before, DCIP says that a 12-year-old boy, Moayed, was waiting for aid when Israeli tanks surrounded him and a group of other Palestinian children. Israeli soldiers forced them to strip in the bitter cold, assaulted them with rifles, and tied them up with plastic cords next to the tanks amid heavy gunfire that lasted for hours. Quote, the army told us to walk in front of the tanks and then stop at every building they wanted to search, Moayed told DCIP. They put us with the rest of the children in front of the tank for a whole day without food or water. I had not had anything to eat or drink for 2 days. This week, we published a searing narrative feature by Assam Al-Nabih, an engineer and PhD researcher in Gaza. Assam currently serves as a member of the Emergency Committee and the spokesperson and director of public relations and media at the Gaza municipality. He writes, quote, by design, tents are meant to be a temporary shelter, not somewhere you would live for more than a few days or weeks at the most. Yet hundreds of thousands of Palestinian families have rotated from tents to UNRWA schools to sleeping in the streets for a few days before moving right back to square one in a loop. As bad as the tent sounds, it is not the worst day-to-day worry for ordinary Gazans. We wake up knowing we may not live to see the sunset, and we say our goodbyes to each other at night before going to sleep, knowing we may not see another dawn should there be an overnight airstrike. Should we survive the night, we wake up hungry, not knowing where food is going to come from. Imagine spending days without eating a morsel. It is hard to, unless you have spent months living or rather surviving like this yourself. In fact, the most sought-after food in Gaza is an egg, let alone bread. Meat, meanwhile, is for a parallel universe galaxies away from Gaza. Children go to bed hungry, wake up hungry, and have suffered greatly due to this cruel campaign of starvation. Those who are sick on a special diet for health reasons or suffer from low blood sugar are either at severe risk or have already died. Mothers have skipped meals to conserve scraps of food for their children. Sure, we are hungry because there is no food, but when there is food, we can't swallow because we know there is always someone else out there who is starving. That's from Assam Al-Nabih's feature, A Conversation Between Life and Death in Gaza on electronicintifada.net. Turning to the occupied West Bank, Israeli forces raided the Al Jazeera bureau in Ramallah on Sunday, ordering the broadcaster to close operations for an arbitrary 45-day period. Al Jazeera reports that, quote, heavily armed and masked Israeli soldiers forcefully entered the building housing Al Jazeera's bureau and handed the 45-day closure order to the network's West Bank bureau chief Walid al-Omri early on Sunday. Al-Omri said the Israeli military's closure order accused the network of, quote, incitement to and support of terrorism. The network's Javara Bouderi said Israeli forces used tear gas in the vicinity of the Al Jazeera bureau and Al-Manara Square in the heart of the occupied West Bank city. She added that Israeli soldiers confiscated their cameras and other recording equipment. Israeli military vehicles left Ramallah after the raid. Al Jazeera's Nida Ibrahim said the West Bank raid and the closure order come as no surprise after the ban earlier this year on reporting from inside Israel. Israeli forces were filmed ripping down a poster of Shireen Abu Akleh, the Palestinian-American journalist who was executed in Jenin in May 2022. Earlier in the week, Israeli forces killed 7 Palestinians during an invasion of the town of 𝐓𝐡𝐞 near Jenin, backed by armored bulldozers, fighter jets, and drones, according to Al Jazeera. The network and local news outlets showed video footage of Israeli soldiers pushing the bodies of Palestinians off of the roofs of homes that they had earlier raided and occupied. One soldier can be seen kicking one of the bodies until it falls off the roof. The 3 Palestinians had been shot on the rooftop earlier. And the Wafa news agency reported that a military bulldozer confiscated the bodies after they had been thrown and kicked off the roof. Euromed Human Rights Monitor stated, quote, what happened in 𝐓𝐡𝐞 defies the legal definition of war crimes as it is part of a systematic and ongoing pattern of dehumanization that Palestinians have endured for decades, rather than an isolated, exceptional incident committed by some soldiers. The crimes committed in 𝐓𝐡𝐞 reflect the ongoing genocidal practices Israel has carried out with impunity. Save the Children reported this week that on average, 5 Palestinian children have been either killed or injured by Israeli forces every day in the West Bank since October. Jeremy Stoner, the charity's Middle East regional director, said, quote, these actions are not isolated incidents. They are part of a trend of increasing Israeli military operations and use of force that are systematically eroding the safety, security, and fundamental rights of Palestinian children who are paying the highest price in this escalating violence. Focusing now on Lebanon. After 2 days in a row of its terrorist attacks using personal communications devices last week, Israel bombed a building in Beirut on Friday, killing several high-level military commanders in Hizballah's Radwan unit. On Monday, Israel launched major airstrikes across southern Lebanon and in Beirut, killing nearly 500 people and injuring approximately 1,700. On Tuesday, 60 more were killed. Lebanon's health minister Firas Abiad said that 50 children and 94 women were among those killed in the past 2 days. The attacks targeted medical centers, ambulances, civil defense teams, and the cars of people trying to flee the bombing. Israel hit more than 24 separate areas in its attacks on southern Lebanon. This video shows a bombing of Mazarat, Sinai. The Israeli army said that it had bombed more than 1,100 targets in 650 different attacks with more than 1,400 bombs only on Monday, claiming that the targets were locations where Hezbollah weaponry had been stored inside civilian homes, the same excuses the army uses in its genocidal attacks on Gaza. Israel killed a journalist with Al-Mayadeen, Hadi al-Sayed Hassan, in an attack on his home on Monday. And on Tuesday, Israel again struck areas of the Dahia suburb of Beirut, killing at least 6 and injuring more than a dozen people. Al Jazeera reported this morning, Wednesday, that the Israeli military continued to strike targets in Beirut and across southern Lebanon, hitting 20 villages in the early morning hours. The Lebanese health ministry said that at least 50 have been killed and more than 200 wounded already today. Hizballah has been hitting Israeli military targets in northern Israel, including the Atlit naval base south of Haifa and the Dado base near the northern city of Safad. The headquarters of Israel's Northern Military Command has also been targeted. Hezbollah has also launched rockets and missiles at Israeli settlement colonies inside the occupied West Bank and at the Mossad headquarters in Tel Aviv. Jon will have much more details on the war later on in the program, and we'll discuss Hezbollah's strategy right after that. Meanwhile, the U.S. Pentagon announced that the Biden administration is sending additional American military forces to the region, with the department's spokesperson, Patrick Ryder, declining to specify how many more U.S. troops are being sent or what they would be tasked to do. The U.S. already has about 40,000 troops in the region. The Associated Press reported that on Monday, the aircraft carrier USS Harry S. Truman, 2 Navy destroyers, and a cruiser set sail from Norfolk, Virginia, headed to the 6th Fleet area in Europe on a regularly scheduled deployment, they say. Ryder said that, quote, "In light of increased tension in the Middle East and out of an abundance of caution, we are sending a small number of additional U.S. military personnel forward to augment our forces that are already in the region. But for operational security reasons, I'm not going to comment on or provide specifics." Palestinians, meanwhile, in Gaza declared their unwavering solidarity with the people of Lebanon. Journalist Hossam Shabat tweeted on Monday, quote, "The same scenario that occurred in Gaza is currently unfolding in Lebanon. Israel is a terrorist state, and the international community has granted them impunity to bomb and kill throughout the region without facing any consequences. From Gaza, we stand in solidarity with Lebanon." And Twitter user Denya posted this short video of the sunset in Palestine, saying, "The sun is setting in Palestine. Our hearts are with our people in Lebanon." And continuing on that thread of solidarity and shared struggles for liberation, this week in Gaza, the psychiatrist Mustafa Al-Masri posted this video of children showing off their gardens, immaculately cared for in tent shelters. And our contributor Abu Bakr Abed in central Gaza shared this photo of blooming jasmine, saying, "My jasmine tree today, I'll never lose hope." And that's it for the news roundup. As always, go to electronicintifada.net for much more, especially to read our new features by our brave writers in Gaza. You're watching the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleague Ali Abunimah. Hi, Ali.
Hi, Nora. Thank you for that report. There's so much harrowing news this week, and
yeah,
you know, the massacres in Gaza continue, and now the massacres in Lebanon, and it's just shocking that, well, I guess it's not shocking when you're dealing with Israel that
right.
It has killed now more than 600 people in Lebanon in what, 3 days?
Yeah.
And you compare that to Israel's war in Lebanon in 2006, which was also a horrific massacre of civilians, where in 34 days, it killed 1,200 people. So already in 3 days, it's reached half of that number, and thousands more injured. So just the genocidal nature of this regime is just, plain for all to see.
Yeah. And of course, what did the Biden administration say earlier this week? They're supporting escalation as a form of de-escalation, or they're trying to de-escalate and escalate at the same. I mean, it's all just, it turns your brain into oatmeal trying to wrap your head around the gymnastics that the West is using to support this depraved settler colony, an outpost of Western empire in West Asia. And it's a very concerning time. And we'll have much more, of course, as I said, with Jon's report coming up, and then we have a lot to discuss at the end of the program. But Ali, Let's introduce our special guest today.
Right. Thank you, Nora. Well, just a reminder that I'm Ali Abunimah, and I'm here with my colleague Nora Barrows-Friedman, and you're tuned in to the Electronic Intifada live stream. Monday this week marked the birthday of Refaat Alareer, the educator, writer, poet, frequent contributor to the Electronic Intifada, and a beloved friend and mentor to many. Refaat would have turned 45 on September 23rd, but his life was cut short when Israel murdered him in an airstrike in Gaza City on December 6th. He was killed along with his brother's son, his sister, and 3 of their children, and a neighbor when Israel bombed his sister's home. Many of you have been with us on this long and painful journey over the last year will know that Refaat appeared several times on the Electronic Intifada live stream, which we launched right at the beginning of the genocide. And during the first episode of the live stream on October 9th, we could hear the bombs exploding in the background as Refaat described why Palestinians insist on fighting for justice and liberation in the face of Israel's genocidal violence. His last live stream appearance was on December 1st, just a few days before his murder. Refaat left behind his wife Nusayba and their 6 children. On 26th of April this year, Refaat's eldest child, Shayma, was murdered in an Israeli attack, along with her husband, Muhammad Abdulaziz Siyam, and their 3-month-old son, Abdul Rahman. The baby was born after Refaat's death and was his first grandchild. Following his death, Refaat's life and work became known to people all over the world, especially through his haunting and prescient poem, If I Must Die. He wrote it in 2011, but reposted it on his account on Twitter, now known as X, on November 1st, several weeks into the genocide. The poem opens with the words, "If I must die, you must live to tell my story." Those words have become a call to action for many of us, particularly Refaat students who continue to try to survive this genocide in Gaza. We are proud that we are publishing their work at the Electronic Intifada every day, and I know that this is what Refaat wanted. On November 2nd, the day after he posted his poem on Twitter, Refaat wrote me a WhatsApp message. He said, "All those pieces you publish for my students keep me going." And perhaps no one has been more inspired to action by Refaat's words than his former student, colleague, and close friend, Yousef Aljamal. He's working on a number of projects to honor and share Refaat's life and legacy. Yousef is the Gaza coordinator for the Palestine Activism Program at the American Friends Service Committee. He is himself a refugee who grew up in Gaza's Al-Nusayrat refugee camp. Yousef is also the co-host with Helena Cobban of the Palcast podcast, which is available on Apple Podcasts. He's also been a regular contributor to the Electronic Intifada, and I'm proud to call him a dear friend. We're delighted to have him join us on the live stream today from the road. Welcome, Yousef.
Hi, Ali. Thank you very much for the introduction, and I'm very glad to join you today.
Thank you. Thank you so much,
Nora.
Yousef. So, Yousef, like every family in and from Gaza, yours has not been spared the horrific price of this genocide. You've lost many relatives, including on May 21st, your dear father. You actually wrote an article headlined, "Education in Gaza has been decimated, but the spirit of Refaat Alareer will prevail," and you dedicated it to your father. I just wanted to acknowledge that and offer our condolences to you and your family and ask you how you're doing.
Thank you very much, Ali. So I have lost a total of about 30 family members since October 7, and dozens of friends and neighbors and people that I met and dealt with in Gaza. Every day there is a new update from my town and other towns in Gaza. Israeli bombing, and that kills more Palestinians that I know or I knew personally. And the issue is that we do not have the privilege of mourning and feeling sad for the many losses that we experienced since October 7. So this is what we're doing now. we're trying to maintain the legacy of our friends, our neighbors, to tell their stories. This is Refaat's will, to tell his words to other people and to narrate his love for Palestine. And this is what we're doing today. We're not feeling well, but at the same time, we do not have the luxury of sitting down and, you know, mourning the many losses that we experienced since October 7th.
And we're going to talk a lot more about Refaat's work and the way that you're preserving his memory. But many people do ask us about Refaat's family. How are they doing?
So, as you mentioned, Refaat's eldest and most beloved daughter was killed on April 26 by an Israeli airstrike, along with her husband and a 3-month old baby. The rest of his children, his wife, are physically fine. They were displaced many times, including when Refaat was still with us. And after that, I prefer not to talk about their location because they feel like their sister Shayma was targeted because she's the daughter of Refaat Alareer. So for safety reasons, we cannot reveal their location, but they're doing okay. They are being displaced on regular basis, but they're surviving and they are together in Gaza City.
That's good. That's good to hear, and that's, I know, a relief for many of us. So, as I mentioned, Yousef, this Monday would have been Refaat's 45th birthday. I know from the unforgettable times I got to spend with him in person 10 years ago when you and Refaat and Rowan Yari toured the US to talk about Gaza Rights Back, that Refaat was just tremendous fun to be with. We're going to talk more about that book in a few minutes, along with the other projects. But can you share a memory of Refaat? How do you like to remember him?
As you said, Ali, Refaat is a man of life and joy. He had the greatest sense of dark humor. He would always crack jokes, and he would always make us remember places. He would give names to places or people or even animals that we see like on our travels. I remember one time he saw two identical cats in Malaysia, in the city of Malacca, and he named them as copy and paste, and he pasted that to his social media accounts. I know remember when we crossed the Brooklyn Bridge in New York City, he engraved the name of his town, 𝐄𝐥𝐿 there. He always liked to tell people that he's from 𝐄𝐥𝐿. In Washington, D.C., there is an armchair named after him because he loved that armchair. He would sit there and he would like crack jokes and tell us about his love for storytelling. Sometimes his jokes are brutal, but we always loved him and we loved his jokes. And now it feels very sad that we have lost him. But again, our job, our task is to maintain his legacy. So this is how I remember him. He liked everything. He liked films. He would tell us about new films, drama series. He was up to date with football. He was also into storytelling and literature, both in English and Arabic. Writing. When he taught us the translation course, he was like the best one. When he taught us the grammar course, he was the best one. So he's very good at everything he did. He was the best poet, the best writer. So he excelled. He was very smart. He was very good at many things at the same time. And he always came up with the creative ideas. So he was a generator of ideas, always thinking about creative ways to present the Palestinian narrative and tell the story of Gaza and 𝐄𝐥𝐿.
Yeah, there's when I think about Refaat, Yeah, I remember his writing. I remember his really dark sense of humor. The jokes that we were sending back and forth. During the first few weeks of the genocide, and up until just a few days before he was killed. But also his seriousness and his ability to to see very, very far into the future of what was coming for Gaza and for the region, and for the world. And yeah, it's every day it feels like I remember something else that he said or something else that he wrote. And yeah, it's still unbelievable to know that he's not with us in this realm anymore. Well, Yousef, some of the projects you're working on will be helping to support Refaat's family, in addition, of course, to keeping his legacy alive. So let's talk about those projects now. In August, the Electronic Intifada published 3 previously unpublished diary entries Refaat wrote in October during the first few weeks of the genocide. And Ali and I read some excerpts from them here on the live stream a few weeks ago. And those pieces will be included in a forthcoming book titled If I Must Die, Poetry and Prose. It's edited by you and will be published by OR Books. Can you tell us a little bit more about the anthology and how it came together?
So the idea of the anthology is to put some of Refaat's works, I would say most of Refaat's works, but not all of them, in a single book to keep his legacy and memory alive. Refaat has written many opinion pieces, features, poems. He contributed chapters to books. He also had memes and social media posts, photos, lectures online. And I wanted, with the help of his family and the approval of his family, to preserve his legacy and publish these works and these articles in a book, for future generations to know Refaat and to know his writings. And most of these writings are online. Many of them were published by the Electronic Intifada and Wonder Wise and Refaat's own blog, This is Gaza. So I just wanted to, make sure that his words are kept and protected, and people can access them in a book format. Of course, the name of the book, the title is If I Must Die, after Refaat's most famous poem. And it also speaks of the need to tell Refaat's story, because this is what Refaat wanted us to do. And this is why we're working on this project, to publish his poetry and his articles and some of his photos and social media posts, as well as his lectures online, just to tell his story and for people to be able to read his work and to document what he has written over the years in a book. And hopefully more books, more projects will also study Refaat and his work and his words, because I believe Refaat's legacy is too huge. It cannot be contained between 2 covers. But this is just the start of what should be done, and the need to protect and preserve Refaat's legacy. So the book will be published, as you said, by Our Books in December, on the first anniversary of Refaat's killing in Daraj neighborhood in Gaza City. And again, this is just a small token of appreciation of what Refaat himself taught me and many other students and friends and colleagues. The seeds he planted are everywhere, and this is the least, as students of Refaat, this is the least we could do now to preserve his legacy.
And as you said, the book will be coming out in December. Where can people go to pre-order it?
So people can get the book through the Our Books website. They can pre-order the book, and it will also have a back cover as well, like the thick back cover. It will be available online. And as I said, many of these writings are also available online on different websites, such as Wise and the Electronic Intifada and Refaat's on blog, so people can access them and read them.
I just want to say I think it's tremendously valuable to have them all together in one book, because over the last few months, I've gone back to some of Refaat's writing, and it's remarkable to me how even more meaningful it is now with time. Especially, we're going to talk about Gaza Writes Back, but when I read his introduction to that book, which was written more than 10 years ago, I feel like he was writing it for us today. He was explaining to us today how to think about telling the story of Gaza. And we've said this before, and it's the absolute truth, that if it were not for Refaat, almost single-handedly, we would not have so many people writing from Gaza today, bearing witness to this genocide. We wish there were no genocide, but even worse than this genocide would be if this genocide were happening and nobody knew about it. There was no testimony. And it is, we often say this, that we don't have the same kind of writing coming out of the West Bank, for example. And that's because Refaat was not there. Of course, there are wonderful writers in the West Bank, but Refaat's project was to reach the whole world by teaching people to use English. He strongly believed in that. And that is why, I mean, that is such a large part of what we're able to do today at the Electronic Intifada, and it's because of Refaat. And so to me, just having this book, If I Must Die, Poetry and Prose, is going to be just a treasure, and something that I know that I personally am going to go to all the time. And I'm looking at that picture of Refaat, and I believe that's in Philadelphia, and I remember meeting you and Refaat there during that visit.
Yeah.
Absolutely, Ali. I think, as I said, this is the least, as students and as people who benefited from Refaat's training. It was because of Refaat's training that we have an army of writers now. Not just an army of writers in Gaza, but also writers who understand the settler colonial nature of Israel. So Refaat also politicized an entire generation, and that's why Israel saw in him a target and a threat to their narrative. And his expo marker, as he said during one of his last appearances on the Electronic Intifada live stream, was the reason he was murdered. It was a very powerful weapon, and that's why Israel wanted to get rid of him. And as Refaat always said, that storytellers threaten, colonizers. The narrative war is very important, and he believed in that. And he trained thousands of people for free. I helped him organize many workshops in Gaza and to train young people. And he co-founded the We Are Not Numbers, just to encourage young people to tell their stories. And one last thing about Refaat is that he reached out to every single person in Gaza. So he made English and storytelling and narrative available to people regardless of their backgrounds. And that's why the stories that come out of Gaza are more powerful.
And after he was killed, it was revealed that he co-founded or organized the social media for the Gaza municipality. And that has turned into this incredible initiative, this campaign where, just last week, and I didn't get a chance to include it in my news report, but the Gaza municipality is now, working to repair infrastructure that the Israelis have destroyed around Gaza. And they're fundraising for these initiatives to rebuild Gaza, and provide for the community, and so that is also a legacy that Refaat leaves, that
And of course,
grows and is, yeah.
Asim and Nabi, who wrote
So
that
Right.
moving
was
piece. Yeah, go ahead, Yousef.
yeah, I was going to also mention Asim Nabi, who wrote an article for the Electronic Intifada. Rifat kept bullying him for years to write, and he finally decided to publish something. So Rifat would be laughing in heaven now, reading Asim's article on the Electronic Intifada. But I also know that he was running many other social media accounts on Palestine in English and Arabic, and he was part of his training when he trained students on creative writing and feature writing. He would also train them on social media.
Yeah. And Asim, of course, now, who is a student and childhood friend of Refaat, is now, running the campaign for the Gaza municipality. And I also want to mention that in addition to this this really difficult and moving piece that Asim wrote for the Electronic Intifada, he also just published a piece at Mondoweiss commemorating Refaat on his birthday. So I really want to recommend people read that as well. And Yousef, I mentioned Gaza Writes Back a few minutes ago. It's the really revolutionary book of short stories written by young Gaza writers in English that Refaat edited, and it was published by Just World Books in 2013. And I think we have a picture of you and Refaat and Rawan Yari during that famous and wonderful tour of the United States that you did in 2014, and I had the pleasure and the privilege to join you at various stops. We met in Philadelphia, in Chicago, where Refaat famously tasted Chicago pizza for the first time, and continued to talk about that.
I think it changed his life. Yeah.
It changed his life, and he never forgot it. And then in California, and we were together with you, Nora, as well, at that stop. So we have wonderful memories of that trip. Just World Books is going to be publishing a memorial edition of Gaza Writes Back, and I think we can show that. There is Refaat at Giordano's with the deep dish pizza. But we also have a picture of the new memorial edition of Gaza Writes Back, and I'm really very personally honored that our friend and colleague Helena Cobman, the founder of Just World Books and the co-host of the Palcast podcast with you, invited me to write the foreword for the new edition of Gaza Writes Back. Just tell us a bit about this new edition, and it's not there are some changes to it, and also the book itself is not just a book; it's also a form of solidarity. Tell us more.
So, Gaza Writes Back was a very important project that Refaat engaged in, and that resulted in the publication of the book in 2014 and the speaking tour. And this is how Refaat was able to travel to the US. Refaat, Rawan, and I toured 10 US cities, 7 states, and we spoke to hundreds of people at churches, community centers, universities, mosques, etc., because of that book. So I believe that we cannot talk about the legacy that Refaat created without mentioning Gaza Writes Back. And Refaat loved the book a lot. And now the legacy of this book is going beyond English and the United States. There are people reading Refaat's work, edited book in different languages. I know the book has been translated into Spanish, Italian, Greek. Helena has done a great job negotiating with different publishers, but also advocating for the family and supporting Refaat's family after his murder. So I would say that there's a dozen of translations now of Gaza Writes Back. Some of them came after Refaat's murder. Helena is also negotiating translating the book into more languages. It came out in Arabic and Kuwait recently, and they chose the title 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿 that Refaat loved. Gaza resists by writing, and this is how Refaat saw Gaza Writes Back. It was a form of resistance. So I'm very glad that Just Word Books is working on a new memorial edition to remember Refaat, and I think it's the time for many people to read Gaza Writes Back again.
Yeah. As I said, when I reread it, when I was writing the foreword, before writing it, I reread the book, and it just struck me, reading it 10 years later, including your story, Yousef. You have a very moving piece in it, that it felt so prescient and it felt so relevant. And I'm just delighted that it's coming out in a new edition. If I can say that proceeds from this book are going to support Refaat's family. So that's an important part of this story, which is that this will continue to support his family, with whatever comes in the future. When is it going to come out, and how will people be able to get it?
This book, to Gaza Writes Back, the memorial edition, will come out on December 6th as well, and people can get it from the website of Just Word Books. And I know that there are thousands of copies of Gaza Writes Back that has been sold. I have to acknowledge the work of Helena Coben in preserving the memory of Refaat and supporting his family. And I also have to say that this is the only short story I wrote, Omar X, in Gaza Writes Back, and it was thanks to Refaat. He pushed me to write, and I wrote one story in the book. Refaat himself wrote 3 stories. So the memorial edition will also have updated pieces by most of the writers in the book about how Refaat impacted their life. So I think this is really important, and I encourage people to get the book and read it.
Yeah, so it will be available from Just Word Books from December 6th, but maybe there will be a pre-order option. I'm not sure about that, but people can check at Just Word Books. And I assume also that it will be available everywhere that books are sold. And if you go to your bookstores, you can ask for it, as the original edition was available. Yeah, so that is just a wonderful way to remember Refaat.
And that's not, I mean, we've talked about 2 books. There's another book that you're working on, Yousef, called Displaced in Gaza. It's a collaboration between the American Friends Service Committee and the Hashim Sani Center in Malaysia. Can you talk about that? And also there's a documentary coming out on Japanese television also in December. What do you know about that?
So this is exactly what Refaat wanted, to tell the story of Gaza, the stories of people in Gaza. And today, 1.9 million Palestinians in Gaza are displaced. So the stories of displaced people in Gaza. As you mentioned, the book Displaced in Gaza is a collaboration between the American Friends Service Committee and the Hashim Sani Center for Palestine Studies at the University of Malaya in Kuala Lumpur. Refaat himself was a non-resident scholar. Raed Qaddura was also a non-resident scholar. Both of them were murdered by Israel. So the idea of the book is to tell the stories of people in Gaza, of students, barbers, old, young, men and women, and how they feel during displacement and the difficulties they go through, losing family members, losing their homes. Some of them were injured. Some of them lost immediate family members. Some of them lost their businesses. Some of them were starved. Some of them are in tents. So they tell their stories and they speak of their aspirations and their dreams. And this is exactly what Refaat wanted us to do. So I see this project as a continuation of Refaat's legacy of storytelling. As you said, the book is a collaboration between the American Friends Service Committee, which has been working in Gaza since 1948, creating Palestinian refugee camps before UNRWA took over. The Hashim Sani Center has been doing also amazing work on Gaza. There will be an annual conference of Palestine studies on the genocide in Gaza on November 29 and 30 this year. So the book is a collaboration between these two parties, and we hope that people will be able to read it, and eventually we will be able also to get it to the US, to republish it in the US and distribute it in the US. As you said, there are many things to work on in Gaza today. We have a genocide going on, and the least we can do is to tell the stories of people there. And this is how I see displaced in Gaza as well.
Beautiful. Well, we just have a couple minutes left. Ali, go ahead.
Yeah. So Yousef, among the many things you do is host the Palcast podcast along with the wonderful Helena Cobban, who we've had now several times on the live stream, and I'm certain we'll have her on again soon. She's always very enlightening. You are, of course, a prolific writer. In our final minutes, is there anything you'd like to add about the work you're doing, and tell us how people can stay connected with the projects you're doing?
So 3 quick things. I want to answer the second question that Nora asked about the Japanese documentary on Refaat's life and legacy. It will come out in Japanese and then hopefully English on October 13. And I know that it will be a great one. There are a lot of people interviewed for the documentary from different countries who knew Refaat closely. So I ask people to tune in and watch out for the release of the documentary. The photo you have on the screen is, as I remember, is of Refaat in Bellingham in Washington. And there is a funny story about it, because Refaat forgot his computer mouse at a friend's house called James, and James wanted to send the mouse to Refaat, but Refaat said it's okay, never mind. But he kept asking about his computer mouse for many years. Even on October 7 last year, I was in Bellingham, and he asked me to ask if James has 1,000 mice now. And I asked James if he has 1,000 mice, and he said no. Of course, Refaat, using his sense of humor and his language skills and his pun games, he liked to play a game called Pun Intended. And when I told him James doesn't have any mouse, he said he must have a cat. So this is Refaat, and this is his story. And of course, Palcast. This week we are interviewing Asim al-Nabi, Refaat's close friend. We've been doing the podcast since November last year. We do it on weekly basis along with Helena Cobban and Tony Groves. And every week we have a new guest. So I ask people to subscribe and to listen to the podcast. And I will have more articles coming out on October 7, hopefully. So that's my project for now.
And it is available. The Palcast podcast is available on Apple Podcasts. And I believe your most recent episode was also an interview with Rawan Yaghi.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks for reminding me, because Rawan also started an initiative, a newsletter titled Refaat Writes Back. So I asked people to find the initiative online and subscribe to the newsletter. And Rawan was one of Refaat's best friends and students as well.
Yeah, and maybe we can get her on the live stream. I think we would love to do that. So, Rowan, if you're watching this, we'd love to have you come on, but we'll get in touch with you. So we would love to hear more about that. Yousef, thank you for all the work you're doing amid such difficult circumstances, because you, just like every other Palestinian, particularly Palestinians from Gaza, are living through this horror. So I just am in awe of your ability to keep going, to keep doing this productive work, to keep educating people and reaching out to people and enriching all of us with what you're doing, and particularly with keeping Refaat's legacy alive. He continues to reverberate. Looking at him standing in front of that beautiful lake, Refaat really is like the stone you throw into the lake. The waves and the ripples keep going out further and further and touching more people. And as you said, Yousef, none of us, but of course, especially those in and from Gaza, have had really the time, the space, the ability to properly mourn and remember and celebrate their loved ones, their friends, their family members who have been murdered in this genocide. It's going to be a project. It's going to be a process, is what I mean, that takes many years, if not decades. But what you've done with already so many wonderful ways that you're preserving and expanding Refaat's legacy is a true gift to all of us. And I just want to thank you so much for it. And I hope we'll have you back soon to talk more about the work you're doing.
Thank you very much, Ali and Nora. And Nora, this photo of Refaat in front of the lake is actually in California. So keep an eye. Thank you.
Oh, well, he's always, we all feel him around us still. Yeah. And in all the places and in all the ways. And especially through people like you, his close best friends and family, and the work that you're continuing to, as Ali said, create these ripples for generations to come. So thank you so much, Yousef.
Thank you, Yousef. Be safe, and we will see you soon.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Oh, I'm so glad we got him. He's a treasure. He really is.
Yeah, and I mean it, how he's able to do so much incredible work. And of course, he's working with the AFSC, the American Friends Service Committee, the Gaza coordinator for the Palestine Activism Project. Check out the American Friends Service Committee and their programs about Gaza. They have been, AFSC has been working to keep a focus on Gaza for many years, long before this horrific genocide, and now Yousef is working with them. So I say that because there's very likely somewhere near you where you can get involved with their work or through their work, because many people are always asking us how they can get engaged, and so that's one way to do that.
Yeah. And also to follow Gaza Municipality on Twitter. I think it's Muni Gaza, MUNI Gaza. And of course, you can always pre-order the books that are coming out from OR Books and Just World Books. So there's a lot of ways to also keep Refaat's writing and his literary, poetry, philosophical, and humor projects going. So,
Yeah.
Well, good. Thank you so much. And let's bring on Jon. We're going to switch gears and talk about.
That was a great interview, guys.
Yeah.
That was,
Yeah.
touching.
Thanks, Jon.
Yeah. Thanks.
We miss him.
We do. We do in so many ways. So yeah, there's been a lot happening this week. I know Refaat would have a lot to say about.
He still does. I mean, you know, I found myself. Can I just say this?
Yeah.
You know, for a long time after Refaat was killed, I found it very difficult to read his words, to watch videos of him, to look at his Twitter account. And I found recently that I feel okay to go back to his Twitter account, and then, as I said, when I was writing the forward for the memorial edition of Gaza Writes Back, reading his words again, and his Twitter is just hilarious, and it's like, you know, there's a tweet for everything.
There's a tweet for everything.
There's a tweet
Still
for
super
everything.
relevant. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's one way that I really feel his presence every day. You still see people retweeting him, quoting him.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It's remarkable.
Funny, but he's also just politically sharp.
Yeah.
You know, like that makes the humor, I think, even hit harder because he's so analytically accurate too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
That was
a
lot of deep breaths over on this side while that was going on. So I appreciate you guys doing that. And Nora, you're a hero for doing those newscasts. They're just devastating. And Thanks. I think a lot of people appreciate them, and it's really important to do them. And when you see you doing them, you realize that nobody else is doing them like that. No English language media is doing it like that. And so just good job, guys.
Thanks. I appreciate that. All right. Well, take it away.
Let's do it. All right. So we are going to start as ever in the southern Gaza Strip. Picked up this week. I've been talking about the battle of attrition and how the fighting was had sort of curtailed a little bit over previous weeks. If we look at these maps here, if we look at overall Gaza, I've been talking about how the Israeli military has been keeping itself into those two corridors, the Netzarim corridor in the north there that divides Gaza in half, and then down on the south, the Philadelphia corridor on the Egyptian border. And we've given you tons of background on those. And over the past few weeks, the Israelis had focused their attention on the Philadelphia corridor and attempting to dig tunnels, to close tunnels. While they stick long chutes down into the ground in an attempt to find where the tunnels are, and then they dig around them. And so that was a pretty significant project that tied up a lot of their troops. Well, this week they moved back into the city in a number of circumstances, and we went from seeing 6 or 8 operations in all of Rafah for the first 3 weeks of September to seeing 16 qualitative operations in Rafah this week alone. So we are going to focus in on that. If we look at this zoomed in map here, we can see the main areas of Rafah. The Israelis come from the border around Kerem Shalom, which is right down south of the Rafah crossing, and the way you look at that map, east in the way that we describe it. And so they move in from that border, from south up into the city. And just before we came on air, there was a video published of Qassam Brigade's operation that targeted that supply line. And that was the third operation. We'll get into that next week. They missed our deadline. But that was the third qualitative operation this week along hitting that supply line to feed the Philadelphia corridor with troops and supplies and weaponry. So that's an interesting development. But still, Tel Sultan on the western edge of the Philadelphia corridor is where there's been multiple operations, and there was a couple in the center of Rafah as well. So we are going to dig into those here. If we look at number 1, we're seeing here, this is Yassin strike against a Namr troop carrier going to see a lot of Namr troop carriers this week. I think that's part of the convoy that's shuttling troops into the Philadelphia corridor to carry out that work. So we see more Namrs than usual, and not seeing them in tank convoys in the way they were before. Not sure what we're seeing there, but I believe it's shuttling troops down to the Philadelphia corridor. And you can see this is from inside a house. And when you're firing from inside a house around these walls like this, the trophy active protection system that the Israeli military armored vehicles uses just doesn't have any chance on this. And you can see that that's a direct hit in that one. And you can hear a secondary explosion in the original video that we have removed the audio from. You can find the original videos on my Twitter feed. Maybe tomorrow I can throw that up in the ticker at some point during this, but that's where you'll find it. But this particular tactic, showing them inside, still operating inside homes. We'll remember that the commander of the 162nd Division that is in charge of the battle in Rafah told us on the 12th of September that the fighters had been dismantled and destroyed. And so we're going to see for this next half hour or so that is just not true. And I can't count the number of times we've done this before. If the Israeli military were to reinvade Shuja'iyah tomorrow, speaking of Refaat, Shuja'iyah would be there to meet them in an organized military formation that the Israeli military keeps saying that they defeat and dismantle, but they don't. They use that term dismantle because that's what happened to their forces on October 7th. They were dismantled. Their command and control was destroyed by the Qassam brigades, and that made them unable, the Israeli military, unable to fight all day on October 7th because that had been dismantled. So this video also has tank fire in the background as well. So you could see that it's the Namr mounted machine gun is firing. So these aren't just pot shots. This is in the middle of a battle now, 150 plus days into the invasion of Rafah. So the fighters are still carrying on apace. They don't seem to be in any way visibly degraded according to anything that we're seeing on camera. We can do number 2 here tomorrow. This is a Qassam operation in the center of Rafah versus a D9 armored bulldozer. And this says targeting a D9 military bulldozer at dawn. 24 hours later, it was taken over and the flag of the Al-Qassam brigades was raised on it and it was set on fire. So what we're seeing here is in the dark. This shot is before daylight, so we don't see a lot of the detail, but you can see there the Yasin shot, and the fighter notes that the bulldozer is burning. And he jokes that it's gonna need another bulldozer to tow it. Well, then they wake up in the morning or go through the entire day, wake up the next morning, and the D9 bulldozer is still there, and they haven't dragged it out. So this fighter says, the enemy has been unable to remove this vehicle from its place of the ambush, our ambush of death. We say to you that you will drown in the sands of Rafah. That's the common line from the fighters in Rafah, that they will drown you in the sands of Rafah. And this fighter says this is dedicated, meaning a gift, like a dedication to our brothers in Yemen and to the axis of resistance. So again, we see the multi-front solidarity from these fighters. They interact with their historical leadership. They interact with the other fronts. We remember when the West Bank operation dialed up, immediately videos out of Gaza were saluting the West Bank resistance by name, by location. And so this multi-front battle has been a critical part of this war. And as we see with the war escalating in Lebanon, which we'll talk about later, the multiple fronts of this war are a crucial part of the story of this war. This war was completely begun by Palestinians, Hizballah, Iran, the Ansar Allah in Yemen. They did not know about this operation. They found out the operation the same day as we. This was an indigenous operation grown in Gaza, commanded from Gaza, using Gaza fighters. And as we've seen over the last 11 months, using Gaza weapons, Gaza-made weapons. We've seen imported weapons But those are the exception to what we see. And the reason why these fighters are still able to go 11 months into this battle is because they made their own stocks and are presumably continuing to make their stocks. So the idea that you're dismantling the Qassam brigades is just not happening. If we go to number 3 there, Tamara, they're not dismantling the Qassam brigades because the Qassam brigades have more recruits than they have fighters killed. They're going to have more recruits than they can handle. These are 2 fighters wiring up a Shawad Qassam built explosively formed penetrator device. And as they're walking over to place it by the road, the one fighter says, the tree, put it on the tree. And this is the first time we've seen them use a tree. We've seen them use an elevated Shawad before. We saw it used out of a window, but it's actually a tactically smart move. It puts the weapon up and aimed down. You see how he's pointed it down. So he's not just throwing it up in that tree. Now we see the Namr here with the tank commander's head popping out, and he's going to get a head-high Shawad device aimed down, pointed down on the tank, on the armored personnel carrier. So it's an ingenious little move here. If we watch it one more time, I can show you the details, because he's placing it. So they're wiring it up here in the house. You can see the device being wired. They're going to take it outside, and you can see the fighter's going to go and put it on the road. You can see here he leans his shoulder in to go on the road, and the second fighter says, right here, says, put it in the tree. And he turns back and he looks and he's like, yeah, let's put it in the tree. So he's got it disguised, camouflaged, so that that it looks like just a shirt stuck in a tree. So it conceals the weapon for the advancing Israeli troops along the supply line. So this is another attack along the supply line. And then they set the cameraman back in a safe distance. And you can see at one point, they're trying to aim for about a meter away from to place the Shawad device a meter away from the armored vehicle, so that the shape charge has a chance to form. And that shape charge is blasted and it pierces in through the metal, through the armor of the tank, and goes inside of the tank. So let's look at number 4. We're seeing an elevated Yasin strike here. Again, elevated strikes are more advantageous because of the armor above. The tanks are built for being hit by other tanks, so their fronts are strongest. And the Israelis put their engine of their armored vehicles in the front to be more protective of their troops. Most tanks have the engine underneath in the back, and the Israelis have theirs in the front. So the armor is thicker in that area. So if you could be elevated and fired down on, as we look here, we see the trophy active protection system engage on this round. It's not clear that it intercepts it, but that ball of flame that you see outgoing there, that's the outgoing round of the trophy APS. But because they're firing through the window there and then around the corner, it's not clear to me that the round gets picked up in time to be neutralized by that system. But again, we're seeing number 5 is another one of these Yasin strikes. Again, this is with a Tandem 85. This is the device that I've told you that they've used. It's another Namr troop carrier. They took the outdated 85 millimeter rounds, and Qassam added a second charge to the front, a 64 millimeter charge to the front, to make it a tandem charge, which allows it to work versus the armored vehicles that have lately, and since that weapon, that's a 1980s Soviet weapon, since that era, the armor has increased on these vehicles. And so Qassam's indigenous ingenuity is to put a second round to animate these. We normally see these being used against bulldozers, and there were this week, there was at least 6 attacks on D9 armored bulldozers this week. So that's interesting to note, because those are the ones who are shaping the land. So if we go to number 6 tomorrow, this is a really remarkable one. We're seeing here a captured M113. This is the outdated, mothballed armored personnel carrier. And this fighter saying that they're fighting us with remotely operated vehicles full of explosives. So this is essentially a car bomb that the Israelis have created. You can see there the plastic explosives inside those thick, heavy bags and filling up the entire infantry cabin compartment below. And they use them as car bombs to destroy houses. It's one of the methods that they use them to destroy houses. We've seen these been hit before, and I've described to you that they're unmanned. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 makes a kit for them to make these vehicles unmanned because they're not battle worthy at this point. You can see the control device there by his knee, and the wires. He's going up here and clipping these wires with a bit of a reckless abandon, but you always have to appreciate these fighters. They've been living through and surviving. These fighters have survived through most unbelievable things. So snipping the wires on this booby-trapped tank didn't seem to phase this 𝐓𝐡𝐞 fighter. And we're looking here at probably something like 4 or 5 tons of explosives, like 10,000 pounds of explosives, which can simply be taken by 𝐓𝐡𝐞 and returned to sender, as they do when they take the bombs. It's a different form. The plastic explosives is in a different form, but it can be used in barrel bombs. It could be used in shawad. It could be used in various other devices too. So the fighter says that they're fighting us with remotely operated vehicles full of explosives. We tell you, fight us face to face. Fight us with your soldiers, and we will drown you in the sands of Rafah. We will dismantle your vehicle of explosives, he says, as he's cutting the wire. And he says, the soldiers are afraid to come at us. If you send us your soldiers, we'll stomp them. And the whole time this video is being shot, there's the Zanana buzz, the buzz that you hear of the drones going over all the time. So he points that out too. He says your reconnaissance vehicles are above us and your automatic vehicles are here below us. So that's interesting to know. We saw these for the first time. People who are regular listeners will remember I identified these vehicles back in February when we saw them for the first time in Khan Yunis. And when we saw one of them get hit, it exploded, an enormous explosion, which we didn't know that they were using these remotely. But that explosion was an indication to look into what was going on here. And and that was in February. So it still wasn't clear in February what was going on. But by May, it became known when they were used in Shujaiya and they were used in the Jabalia camp operation. And some of them were captured because you can capture them with the same system that the Palestinians use to down drones. They capture them by jamming the signal that goes between the controller and the vehicle. You can jam that signal and then spoof that signal and basically tell it where to go to. And that's what they do with these drones here that you're looking at. This is an Avata drone. This is a DJI off-the-shelf drone, but this is what the Israelis have used as their workhorse drone going house to house. So these are the drones that go house to house. We don't see them captured very often, I think because they're close to the soldiers. The soldiers release them from the doorstep and fly them up the stairs. So we don't see them captured as much as we see the other drones. But you can see, look, they just capture it. They got all the video on it. And that's an important story because we'll know that, as Nora reported at the beginning, the Al Jazeera bureau in Ramallah was shuttered this week. And it was shuttered the day after a video was released on Al Jazeera that was provided by captured drone video from 𝐓𝐡𝐞. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 captured Israeli drones, took the video, gave the video to Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera broadcast. We've seen it before. It happened in Shujaiya where they broadcast the human shield video. They've done it a number of times. There are a couple of videos along the waterfront where people were massacred carrying white flags. That's done by 𝐓𝐡𝐞 with captured IDF drone footage. And so that's what led to the closing of the Ramallah bureau. And when the Jerusalem bureau was closed previously, it was closed because of the Shujaiya video that was released. So they're responding, the Israeli military is responding to these war crimes videos being shown because these are potent videos with all of the testimonies in the world from Palestinians don't seem to resonate. But when you have Israeli drone footage of the war crimes, that stuff's going to hold up in court. And it's a remarkable accomplishment of the resistance to do that and to give away their position to give that war crimes footage. And it's a story that would be really great to dig into as it goes on, because the decision that they've made to do that is remarkable. And it has consequences, and Al Jazeera has been shut down based on British mandate era laws. So, and the Israelis have, to go back to the M113s for a second, the Israelis have hundreds of them, like between 500 and 1,000. So if they want to make car bombs out of these M113s, they can do that to numbers in the hundreds. And so when we get testimony from the fighters, I think you could tell by the voice and the way he was describing that M113 that they've seen them before. They've seen them, and we've seen them before, be dismantled, because they're just aluminum. They're not valuable to the fighters themselves to keep the actual vehicle, because they're crap vehicles. So they'll burn them, and we've seen that happen. So that is the resistance report from Rafah this week, from Gaza. Again, we had some, harassment operations, mortars on the Netzarim corridor, but the focus of the fighting in Gaza has been in Rafah, and there's a number of qualitative operations that we didn't see on video. What is hidden is greater, as Qassam says. So maybe next we'll be seeing those come out in the coming days, or it fits with the fact that we only see on video a certain percentage of their operations. So that is the resistance report from Gaza. We are going to go now to Lebanon and try to cover this fast-moving story in Lebanon that Israel just appears like they're going for it, and they believe that they're in an existential battle, and they've spoken it into existence, because this war is not going to go well for Israel if this trajectory takes place here. So I've shown you this map a couple times over the last few weeks to see where the strikes are. We're mainly talking about in the south, although those strikes have been expanding, and that's part of the nature of the growing war, is to expand the distance that each group is targeting. 80%, as I've pointed out on a number of shows, 80% of the attacks since October 8th are by the Israeli military. Israeli civilian casualties are less than 10 in this entire time, and it's difficult to pinpoint exactly what a civilian is, because they were hit in villages that had been evacuated, and we saw that report that I showed you where the mayors and some other people in the villages are doing security work. They're watching the border. They're in an underground bunker with a control in a control room with video all over, and they're the line to the IDF. They get on the phone and say, "There's a drone coming." Whatever. So whether they're called civilians or counted as soldiers, Hezbollah has not been targeting civilians. They target military bases. And this week at the Ramat David Air Base, Yoav Gallant, who is the defense minister, he said that the center of gravity is shifting to the north by diverting resources and forces there. We are at the onset of a new phase in the war. And sure enough, Tuesday was the pager attack. Wednesday was the walkie-talkie attack. Thursday, Nasrallah gave a speech, and more rockets were fired by Hezbollah than at any point in the war, and more airstrikes by Israel than at any time in the war. On Friday, there was the assassination of the Radwan commanders who were in a meeting in the Dahia. I'll get into those details after. I just want to give the timeline so people remember how quickly this all came about. And then Sunday was the big Saturday night, and Sunday was the major escalation that showed that Israel was going to war full on in this case. And then Monday they killed 500 people, 35 children. That number is now doubled. And 2,000 wounded. The Israeli Air Force said they struck 1,600 Hezbollah targets using 2,100 munitions. And that's just the Air Force. The drones added hundreds more strikes, and Israel said they used 250 fighter jets, which is double the number that they have been using previously. We can go to the next map and look at just the strikes over the last. This is the expanding of the strikes by Israel over these last few days, and I just want to point out some things that Nasrallah said about the walkie-talkie and pager events. He said in his speech, he said this was meant to kill 5,000 people instantly. There was 5,000 pagers in the pager shipment. Some of them weren't on. The ones that weren't on didn't blow up. He said this is a significant and powerful blow. There is no doubt that we were subjected to a major blow, both in terms of security and personnel, unprecedented in the history of the resistance in Lebanon, unprecedented in Lebanon and the conflict with the Zionist enemy, he said, and maybe on a global scale, because we've never seen anything even close to that kind of operation. To think about the criminality of that Israeli operation, to secretly intercept a supply chain, put them on an airplane with civilians who have no idea what these are, all throughout the shipment of these pagers. They have to come in trucks in the same way any other device would get shipped over the world. So some plane was flying unbeknownst, holding 5,000 exploding pagers and however many exploding walkie-talkies that would have downed the airplane, killed all the crew. This is a brutal crime that I think there'll be more time to digest and dig into the layers of the sick disposition that would let you think that was a good operation. But in any case, he said that Nasrallah said the Lebanon front is a key bargaining chip for the resistance in Gaza. It's their way to push a ceasefire, to up the stakes, to climb the escalation ladder and get a ceasefire in Gaza. And he said the enemy's attempt to separate the Lebanese front from the Gaza front in threatening war will not happen. He said to Netanyahu, you will not be able to bring the northern settlers back to the north. Do whatever you want. If you want to bring the settlers back, the only way is to stop the aggression on Gaza. No military escalation, no killing, no assassinations, and not even a full-scale war can return your settlers to the borders at all. And then when he threatened about a ground invasion, he said, we are searching for your Zionist soldiers and tanks. We look for them with lanterns and flashlights, he said, joking, right? Because they're not there. They moved 10 kilometers back from the border months and months ago so that they would be out of range of anti-tank fire. So the Israelis aren't even on the border. So he made a joke about that. He says, what you are about to do will further displace those fleeing from the north and will push away any chance of their return. What the enemy considers a threat, we consider a historic opportunity and we welcome it. That's how he views the ground war. A historic opportunity and we welcome it. So that is, well, the last thing he said is the enemy's foolish, narcissistic, reckless leadership will lead it to an abyss, which is, I think, a standard comment that probably most people that listen to the show agree to. It's just Israel is just on a self-destructive, brutal crime binge that we're watching right now. These last few days have been hard on everybody, the Lebanese primarily, but also the war in Gaza carries on at the same pace. So let's look at number 20, because this is Hezbollah admitted who died in the pager operations, and they admitted it right away, which was an interesting development for me, to release the full names and home villages of everyone killed almost immediately, surprisingly immediately. We don't know the names of these commanders. Their operational security is so tight that we don't know the names of their commanders. In fact, when Imad Mughniya, their number one commander, was killed, there was stories after that about how fighters in Hezbollah knew him from coming to meetings, but they didn't know his name, or they knew him as a different name. So they had anonymity even within, in many cases, their own organizations. And so to be able to hit these commanders, those two that you're seeing right there are the two main commanders of the Radwan force. I'll talk about those in a minute, But these assassinations that started with Fouad Shukr, in Lebanon and then carried on with the Radwan Forces commander don't have any analogy in history for the Israelis. They've never been able to get at these Hezbollah leaders inside Lebanon. Qasem Soleimani was assassinated in Iraq. Imad Mughniya was assassinated in Damascus. Mustafa Badreddin was also assassinated in Syria. So these attacks in Lebanon are a big blow, and they're noteworthy for the fact that the pagers suggested a breach, and then these assassinations that follow up have underscored that breach. On Friday, the assassination of the meeting of Radwan commanders, Radwan forces named after Imad Mughniya, Haj Radwan. They were having a meeting. There was at least 8 senior commanders of the Radwan forces, which are special forces, Hezbollah's special forces. They're their attack forces. They're their cross-border raiding force that would go take the Galilee, which is what Israel pointed out when they assassinated them. They said that they were going to carry out a October 7th attack in the Galilee, which is not true in that framing. But the idea that Hezbollah is going to come down the mountain and take the Galilee has been something that Israel's been paranoid about really since the years after the 2006 war. So they were able to kill senior leaders in that operation, top generals, and you add that to Fouad Shukr, and it looks like you have a significant breach within the organization. So let's look at 21, because those 2 main guys that you see there, Ibrahim Akil, he is the number one. Here's who you're looking at here. This is the first footage we've ever seen of them. We did this with Fouad Shukr too, because when they die, we learn who they are. We don't know who they are before. And so Ibrahim Akil Haj Abdul Qadir, he was the number one commander of the Radwan forces. He was the founding commander of that unit, Special Forces unit. And he has been part of the original founders of, you can see him there eating with their troops. They always talk about that their commanders fight from the front, and they eat what their troops eat. And these videos are interesting because we've never seen him interacting with his troops. We've never seen him talk like this. We've never seen these rooms. So operational security only applies until their deaths. And then this video was released by Hezbollah this week. So he was a founder of Islamic Jihad. That was the pre-Hezbollah formation in the 1980s. And those were the guys that carried out consistent operations against the Americans. In the early 1990s, he became the commander of central training, so the overall training of Hezbollah cadre, and became chief of staff of the resistance, of the Islamic resistance in the 1990s. In 1997, he became the commander of operations in South Lebanon, which culminated in the 2000 liberation. And you saw him there in Syria. He fought in Syria, house to house in Syria, fighting that battle in Syria. In 2008, he took over as leader of the Radwan force, founding leader of the Radwan force. And he was also the commander in South Lebanon during the July 2006 war. So you're talking about top commander. And after Fouad Shukr's assassination, he became the top commander of Hezbollah, their overall leader. And here we're looking at Ahmed Wabi, Haj Abu Hassan Samir. He is the number 2 in the Radwan force. So when Ibrahim Akil took over for Fouad Shukr, Ahmed Wabi became the head of the Radwan forces. So a significant loss. July 30th was when Fouad Shukr was lost. Ahmed Wabi was the field commander in the Ansariya operation in 1997. This was a devastating operation that thwarted an Israeli special forces, Flotilla 13 special forces, naval commandos under the command of Yoav Gallant. Invaded Lebanon in the secret, in the dark of night, attempting to carry out an assassination, and counterintelligence operation by Hezbollah met the fighters and wiped out the force, 12 special forces. It's called the boat disaster in Israeli narrative. But these guys, so key operations that he was responsible for, Ahmed Wabi. But both of them are from the founding generation of Islamic Jihad. They carried out the 1983 U.S. embassy bombing, which wiped out the CIA station. in the Middle East and set back the CIA 20 years and set back intelligence in the Middle East more than 20 years. Remember the Iraq War, when the intelligence was so terrible by the CIA in the Iraq War, and what they thought would happen and whether there would be an insurgency, and all of those mistakes that were made can be owed to the removal of a generation of CIA officers that were killed in the Beirut station in the embassy. They were involved in the 1983 Marine Corps barracks bombing, which killed 241 American Marines that were occupying Beirut at the time during the war with Israel after 1982. And they captured the CIA. They bombed the embassy twice. They bombed it a second time, the U.S. embassy, and they quite famously captured the CIA station chief. William Buckley was captured, so that they caught the top intelligence official in that operation. So these Islamic Jihad guys have been wanted all over the American and Western world. There was a $7 million bounty on 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿 for his role, and they didn't know that Ahmed Wehbi was part of that operation because they had no idea who he was, which is part of the story. So it's important to note that these are the founding members, the founding generation of Hezbollah. They have prepared Hezbollah for this battle. Their assassinations do not, they're temporarily disruptive, but they do not derail the operations of Hezbollah, because they have built a military organization that is able to replace its commanders and put people in positions to take over for any lost positions, whether they're lost on the battlefield, lost by assassination. They can be replaced. And that is the story, that this is confronting this face to face. This was a devastating week for Hezbollah. There's no question about it. That pager operation, the assassination of the Radwan commanders, Nasrallah admitted it. It's a blow. There's no point in hiding that. But the reality is, the war that carried on for the 3 days after that was proof that these fighters are able to replace their leadership. And as was the case with Abbas Musawi's assassination in 1990, whatever it was, 92 or 93, he was more moderate than Nasrallah, or not as skilled as Nasrallah, all due respect to him. But Nasrallah came in after that assassination and changed the party in a way that Israel couldn't predict. And that's something that these assassinations always open the door to. So this footage is the first the world has ever seen of these fighters. And Hezbollah puts those videos out. And so I wanted to show you guys those because they mark a significant moment. And Nasrallah always jokes in his speech that there's so much that he can't say about his fighters. And when he does that, he's talking about these people. He's talking about these commanders who have been part of the history of the Middle East for 40 plus years. They've been hunted for years, but nobody knows who they are. In some cases, even in the organization, they don't know who they are. And so that operational security is part of the reason why this week's operations were such a blow to Hezbollah, and such a blow that would be acknowledged by Nasrallah as such. Because these are the founding generation, but they have, like I said, they led the training bureau within Hezbollah. They are the ones who trained the generation of fighters. There's Qasem Soleimani with them, with Ahmed Wehbi, and showing you the connection. So there's one more guy there that was in that picture that has not been killed yet. So anytime you see the blur, that's good. Tomorrow, let's do 22, because the response to this was to upgrade the rocket arsenal that was fired at Israel. So this is the debut of a renamed Fadi rocket. This is it's tier 2. The Katyushas are tier 1. This is a tier 2 rocket, 83 kilograms of warhead. So a much heavier warhead. It's a 220 caliber rocket, so larger than the Grad rockets, double the Grad rocket size, and their range is 70 kilometers, so double the range of the Katyusha rockets that are being fired. And they're named after Fadi Tawil. Fadi Tawil was a founding commander, and his brother was Sam Tawil. He was assassinated earlier in the war, and we reported on that. He's a Radwan commander as well. So these are named after Fadi Tawil. And there's two. There's a Fadi 1 and a Fadi 2. The Fadi 2 is 170 kilograms of explosives, 302 millimeter rocket size, and 100-kilometer range. You could see they're truck launched. And the Hezbollah press pointed out, Hezbollah military media pointed out in their field report that the attacks yesterday were fired. Some of them were fired from the Imad 4 underground facility that we showed on the show a few weeks ago, that crazy underground bunker where they drove all those trucks with missiles on the back. That's what we're looking at being used. And Hezbollah fired 300 rockets on Monday, 300 rockets on Tuesday. So they doubled the number of rockets that had been fired as their peak. That's double the highest number of the 2006 war and double the number that had been fired at any point since October 8th. And the targets were Megiddo Airfield west of Afula, the northern command, the base of the headquarters of the Northern Command, who's responsible for the Lebanon border. They took 100 rockets. The Athlete Naval Base, where the Flotilla 13 Special Forces, they're the same ones that I said that were captured and killed in that 1997 Ansariya raid. So they were targeted. Their facilities were targeted. So they're picking military targets, symbolic, significant military targets, representative, not symbolic, representative targets. And so that is a qualitative upgrade in the way Hezbollah is fighting. If we look at 23, we can see the way these rockets were deployed. So now that you've seen those weapons, you can see here they're showing the Rafael base, Rafael Defense Industries, and they're showing Ramat David Air Base. So this is the Rafael facility and the airfield. And then there's the third, which is the there's two bases. The Rafael base is two bases, and both of those sites, if you'll remember, both of those sites are were subjected to drone footage. The Hezbollah drone footage that I took you through a couple months ago, that was released to show that they have intelligence over all of these sites that are being hit. So Yoav Gallant this week goes up to this Ramat David air base and says, this is where we're going to start the war. And immediately Hezbollah hits that base. So they're communicating with missiles, communicating with rockets. These are rockets. These are unguided rockets. These are not precision guided missiles. Those are still in the quiver to be used later, although it appears one may have been used earlier today to fire on the Mossad headquarters outside of Tel Aviv. But we're seeing these rockets be used, and you can tell a little bit by the launch of them that they're qualitative upgrades from the smaller Katyusha rockets. There's 80,000 Katyushas at least in Hezbollah's control. There's 80,000 of these Fadi rockets. They just introduced a Fadi 3 too yesterday. So yeah, they're hitting the Ramat David Air Base, which is has all the most important. It's the largest air base in the north that has all the most important aerial wing formations that fight from the north. And the David facility of the Rafael Defense Industries, they're the ones who make the Iron Dome and David Sling. And the Rafael headquarters is in Haifa. That's what we saw on the coast there in the map. And so we've seen drone footage detailing all of this. And the David facility is the headquarters of Land and Naval Division. It's their Technologies and Ordnance Division. And the Lisham facility of Rafael in the Galilee, which we've also shown and the drone flew over, is for air superiority systems, air and C4ISR systems. That's surveillance, command and control and surveillance systems. But mostly what they're talking about is Iron Dome and David's Sling that are made in those sites. So we see here, and then Hezbollah attached this footage, which was because the military censor in Israel doesn't allow any reporting on any of this. We have to rely on these occasional settler camera footage to show that anything happened at all. But those bases were targeted, and they're unguided rockets, but you can aim them. They're just unguided when they're in the air. So the rocket strikes hit those bases, and I guess we'll have to wait for satellite footage over those to see what kind of damage there was on those air bases, because those air bases took more than 100 rockets in doing that operation. So that's the Haifa, the base, and you can see it's got the testing ground. You can see there too the testing ground around it. We saw the facilities; they have warehouses and all the weapons testing facilities. They had the jet tester, the wind, what's it called, like the wind channel for testing. They're testing all of these products. So Hezbollah knows where the weapons that are being used to counter their war. Ali will talk more about this later. But they know where the weapons and the systems and the people, the personnel, are based who are carrying out this war. And that's who they target. They're not raining missiles down on Haifa and Tel Aviv, which they could do in numbers of thousands. They could do that. But Hezbollah is not doing that. They don't want an open war. They don't want to massacre civilians. They want to defend Lebanon. They want to defend Gaza. And they added defending Lebanon to defending Gaza just yesterday. They said that our war is expanding to the objectives of this war, expanding to protecting Lebanon and its people, as well as protecting Gaza and being a second front in the war in Gaza. So important qualitative upgrades in the way that this battle is being fought, and the number of rockets more than doubling, which is an interesting development for sure. And if maybe tomorrow we do number 30, because just wanted to show you one last one here, is that we, over the course of the last 3 or 4 days, we saw the introduction of the Iraqi resistance joining the battle. So these are long-range cruise missiles being launched from Iraq. These are Iranian Sumar family missiles, the long-range, heavier payload cruise missiles that are launched, rocket-launched. And Israel had to say that they intercepted these. They intercepted, at least one of these was intercepted, and they used a fighter jet to do it. So again, these cheaper missiles being used and having to be intercepted by billion-dollar jets flying at, $50,000 an hour or whatever, probably more when you consider the repair time. And that's their only defense against these. And so the Iraqi resistance, interesting to note, because if they were to join the war from the east in a concerted way by carrying out these drone and cruise missile attacks, you can see there they're noting the date of the attacks. These are fresh operations, and the Israelis have had to comment multiple times on the fact that they were getting fired. They say that they're targeting military bases in the Jordan Valley, military positions in the Jordan Valley, and that has been their primary target over these last 4 or 5 days. So you can see a number of drone launches coming from Iraq. And, the Americans are in the region. Nora said 40,000 troops. Also, the 101st Airborne is apparently landed in Cyprus to be deployed to Central Command, which is the Middle East's name. And the Americans are trying to keep the regional war element out of it. Because a regional war would mean Islamic fighters that are organized, trained, and battle-tested fighting, and Syrian fighters battle-tested. joining that front. We have Ansar Allah. We saw last week their ballistic missile capabilities and their drone capabilities. You could have a four-front war against Israel on top of the Gaza and the West Bank fronts. And at some point, a war of attrition defined this way is not going to be a war that Israel can win. And we're starting to see, even just in these first days, that Israel is qualifying, is trying to say this might be a short operation. We want this to be a short operation. But my instinct tells me that under these circumstances, ceteris paribus, all things being equal, airstrikes versus Hezbollah's rocket arsenal, especially with the north emptied of civilians and the south emptied of civilians, this war can go on for a long time. There's a lot of resources to carry out that war. If the targeting is not of civilian targets in Israel, but of military bases that are used with the Iron Dome interceptions, which Ali is going to talk about in a minute here, the fight of rockets on emptied settlements and airstrikes on Hezbollah positions or houses that are emptied in the south could go on for a long time. They both have a lot of resources to carry out that war. And if this war by Netanyahu is a way of getting out of the war in Gaza or putting that to the back burner, you'd be very surprised to see Hezbollah leave the Gaza, to break off from the Gaza front. Hezbollah has said all along, the war in Gaza ends, our rockets will stop. And people can go back to their homes, presumably when those rockets stop. And the same, Ansar Allah has said the same thing in Yemen. If you stop blockading the Gaza Strip, they'll stop blockading the Red Sea. These have been known for the entire war. So it looks like we have been covering Hezbollah for the last number of months, but it looks to be a permanent fixture on the live stream to be covering this war as well. So that's the resistance report from Lebanon this week, and that covers it all.
Thanks so much, Jon. Yeah, I mean, I think that point that you made at the end can't be reiterated often enough, that Israel's stated goals. I mean, in the last couple of weeks, Yoav Gallant, we covered this last week, I think, saying that and Netanyahu saying that now their war goal is shifting to repopulating the north of occupied historic Palestine, northern Israel, and so instead of ending the genocide in Gaza, which they don't want to do, they're now escalating, expanding the war on Lebanon, in order to further this completely delusional goal of once again trying to force either Hezbollah or Qassam or Ansar Allah into just surrender with no conditions, or they're just gonna keep airstrike. I mean, it's and the Biden administration is just completely helping them do that. So I mean, Ali, yeah, let's get into it. I mean, what are Israel's goals in Lebanon? Is it even possible to return these settlers to the north? I mean, tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands have already either fled to other places across Israel, or have left the country altogether.
Yeah. Well, first, I mean, I want to get into that, but first, thank you, Jon, for that tremendous report and detailed explanation. I think it answered a lot of questions that I had, and I know that many of our viewers had. And just while we were speaking, there's news coming in and video, and it's being reported now, I can see on the screen of Al Jazeera as well, of a large explosion in the Israeli port of Eilat. And the initial reports say that 3 drones came in, 2 of them were intercepted, and 1 of them hit a warehouse in the port of Eilat. And it's being said that they came from the east. So the speculation is they came from Iraq. So this just goes to show that this can't be contained. It will continue to spread. And Nora, to your question, I mean, what are the stated goal of Israel is to return the settlers back to the kibbutzes and the colonies in the north of Palestine, in the Galilee and on the Lebanese border. And I think of this the same way as how Israel's stated goal for the genocide in Gaza is to bring back the hostages, as they call them. But what is the result of Israel's effort to bring back the hostages? It's to kill the hostages.
Yeah.
And, there was Netanyahu actually briefed Israeli lawmakers this week that he estimated that half of the Israeli POWs and detainees in Gaza are still alive, of the 101 thought to still have remained there. And he thought, oh, this is a pretty good number. I mean, the way I think of it is that he's achieved his goal of killing half of them and wants to, and still has to kill the rest in his mindset. And so it's similar. Israel's stated goal of bringing the Israelis back to the north is actually going to end up with more of them leaving their homes and none of them coming back for an indefinite period of time. It's very obvious that just as the real goal of the genocide in Gaza is to destroy the Palestinian people, to liquidate the Palestinian cause, the goal in Lebanon, at least the initial goal, is to break the link between Lebanon and Gaza. As Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah has been very clear that nothing will break that link. And he said it in his words, in his speech that Jon referred to. He said, no matter what the price, we will not stop the support of Gaza. We will not leave the Palestinian people alone. So this is a shock and awe operation to try to say to the Lebanese people generally and to Hizballah, we will do to you what we've done to Palestinians in Gaza unless this stops. And that explains why they've targeted civilians in such a direct way, using these ridiculous fabricated stories of missiles in people's attics, as if Hezbollah would keep missiles in people's attics, when we've seen the underground complexes where Hezbollah actually keeps the missiles.
And I've shown you months of rocket fire from Hezbollah. There's not a house. That's just.
Yeah. So that's the clear goal, and it's not going to succeed because Hezbollah has too much invested. For them it's existential. So what's the next stage? I mean, either a very long war of attrition, and I want to get to that in a moment when I talk about the Iron Dome, but the news also that has just happened this evening is that Israel has called up 2 reserve brigades and is talking about a ground operation in Gaza. Now, you can look at this in a couple of ways, because also with there's another announcement that came with the announcement of the call up of the reserve brigades, which I think is a total of about 8,000 soldiers. I think each brigade is about 4,000. So they're talking about a call up of 8,000 for a potential ground operation in Gaza. At the same time, we've had the news that Netanyahu has authorized his representative, Ron Dermer, the ex-American, Miami-born Ron Dermer, who gave up his U.S. citizenship in order to become Israel's ambassador to Washington and is now, one of, I think he's Netanyahu's national security advisor. He's authorized him to go and tell the Biden administration that, look, we're willing to agree a ceasefire with Hezbollah. And from the reporting I've seen, it's a separate ceasefire. It's not a ceasefire, a global ceasefire, which Hezbollah said is the condition for stopping the war at the north. So, a ceasefire that includes Gaza, it would be a separate ceasefire. That's what Israel wants. And so by mobilizing the brigades, they're bluff. Well, what's the right word? Bluffing. Is it bluffing? We don't know. They're saying, look, we're ready now to invade or to send in ground troops, but look, we're giving you this way out in the form of this ceasefire agreement. And of course, it's absolutely impossible that Hezbollah will accept that. So what comes next? That's the question. The Israelis may even think that they're bluffing. They may even think that they're calling up these troops just to threaten Hezbollah and to raise the ante. But what I think there's a real risk of happening is that when the Israelis fail in breaking Lebanon with these horrific aerial massacres, just as they failed in breaking Lebanon in all of Israel's previous massacres, and as they have failed in breaking Gaza for these past 11 months of bombardment and genocide, they'll say, well, now our choices as Israel is either to back down or to escalate further. And the further escalation is to send in ground troops. So in a sense, the Israelis get caught in their own trap. And I think there is a very real risk that even if the Israelis don't intend now to send in ground troops, that they're going to end up doing it anyway, because they can't help themselves. There's a phrase that's used very commonly on Arabic by Arabic analysts, al-hurub ila al-amam, meaning escaping forwards. The idea is that, you've got a big problem here. What do? Well, you run forwards to an even bigger problem, and you keep doing that. And that describes Israel's strategy. And I think there's a real risk of that with these developments. So I don't know. I want to talk about the Iron Dome, but I want to let others comment on I'm reacting now to the breaking news, let's say.
Let me jump in on the ground invasion, because let's think about what a ground invasion looks like. They have 3 divisions already up on the border. They stayed there. They didn't come down after October 7th. They had to leave them up on the border for fear that Hezbollah would join that battle. I talked to you last week or the week before about the 98th Division, which was the Raider Division in Gaza that went around and made the mass graves at Shifa Hospital, and Shujaiya battled in the Jabalia camp reinvasion, reinvaded Khan Yunis. So their battle-tested troops, that's who they would send, who are supposed to go back into Gaza, but are now being deployed on the border. Well, they're not being deployed on the border, because this is the next thing that I want to say. For a ground invasion of Lebanon, Israel is going to have to come over into the 15 kilometers of space inside the buffer zone that has been created inside Israel. Their troops have to traverse that space first before they can even enter Lebanon, and they haven't been able to. And the Radwan forces are prepared for that. Nasrallah joked about how we don't see their soldiers because they're so out of that buffer zone, that he carries a lantern around looking for where Israeli soldiers might be. So they have to move through that very dangerous area, with Hezbollah fighting on the mountain. Sun Tzu said, never fight uphill. So Israel's about to do that. And then you have this battle-tested Hezbollah force, who's the Radwan forces, who are prepared for this. They've been preparing for it for 18 years. They are tactically skilled. They're well trained as any army in the world. Special forces. They're experienced. They're well armed. They've had full arming from Iran. They have, because of Syria, they have a land corridor to train, to arm. To improve their skills in those kind of trainings. They operated in Syria interoperable with Russian special forces. So they have all kinds of these experiences that Israeli troops don't have. And we watched Israeli troops perform in the Gaza Strip. And I think when Nasrallah says this is a historic opportunity, I believe him. And I said months ago before that I think that there's just as likely to be a battle in the Galilee as there is to be a battle in Bint Jishbel. The process that it would take for the Israelis to move these 3 divisions from back 15 kilometers push them through this buffer zone while higher forces are looking down on it, and then get through the wadis that they couldn't get through in 2006. The wadis don't change, right? In a city, you can pick a different road. A wadi through a mountain doesn't give you, they're going to be going through the same ones that they were smoked in 2006. So this ground invasion, once the population of the south has moved, which the devastating pictures of them yesterday moving up the highway, the 4-lane highway to Beirut, just wall-to-wall cars. But once that village is empty, and it's going to be an Israeli military on Hezbollah military fight in that area, it's not clear to me that the Israelis overrun that area and are fighting inside Lebanon any more than it is Hezbollah coming down and fighting in the Galilee. Israel's biting off more than they can chew on this one. They can bomb, they can massacre, they can genocide, they can kill civilians who didn't have anything to do with it and drop apartment towers on their head. But in a military to military confrontation, taking everything that we've seen from Gaza, a besieged area, Hezbollah is a completely different game. And
yeah,
I don't see how this goes for Israel.
Yeah, and then
I do see how it goes. It goes extremely poorly and could be hasten the decline that we're watching of Israel and Zionism.
And you have to consider, I completely agree with that, John. You have to consider that in the current situation, Israel's advantage is and has always been its air force. Right now, they have the ability to bomb, as they're doing, to murder civilians on a massive scale, as they're deliberately doing in Lebanon, in Gaza. That's always been their forte. Whatever air defenses Lebanon has are minimal. They cannot cope with this scale of air attack. And the moment the ground troops go into Lebanon, then Israel is playing to Hezbollah's strengths. And that's a situation that which is why I like you believe it when Nasrallah says we would welcome you. When he said in one of his speeches, you're going to come to Lebanon with that broken army that we see in Gaza. They say, well, welcome.
Welcome, Habibi.
Yeah.
Who's army, Habibi?
Yeah. So let's talk about what may be a scenario, which is a prolonged war of attrition. And the reason I bring this up is because I think many people initially thought, well, why is, we saw this, like 500 people massacred in a single day, just this brutal, the usual Israeli behavior. And at first, the Hezbollah response seemed quite tame. People thought, well, why isn't Hezbollah? They've shown us all these big rockets. Why aren't they launching, the big rockets at Tel Aviv and so on? And of course, we understand the dilemma, which is that the moment you do that, they are going to start bombing Beirut the way they've been bombing Gaza City. And Hezbollah, if they can, they want to avoid bringing even more, or I don't want to say bringing because that sounds like I'm blaming them. Israel is solely to blame. But that's the situation which they know Israel would behave that way. And if they can avoid it, they want to. And so, and it's perhaps even what Israel wants. So so this slow escalation, this steady escalation, this avoidance of major, they can clearly hit the heart of Haifa, which is a major city and an economic center in Israel. They've chosen not to do that. They've been targeting the military infrastructure, the military bases, and the settlements, which are already largely evacuated, as a way to say you can't come back. But they're not risking a large number of civilians. So this war of attrition could go on a long time. And I see a lot of Israelis being very confident about the Iron Dome. It's very impressive. And so I was very curious about the Iron Dome, and I wanted to sort of look into it more. So should we go into that now?
Yeah, let's do it. I mean, we saw just, it's every day that we see the Iron Dome either intercepting rockets from Qassam or from Hizballah or from Ansarallah or now from Iraq. But we also see a lot of failures of the Iron Dome interceptors. And so, yeah, Ali, how can we make sense of the role that the Iron Dome is playing? Why it's important to understand that role, and what you're looking at closely.
Yeah, so basically, what is the Iron Dome? It's an anti-rocket system. It's made up of ground launchers, a radar, and it fires volleys of interceptors that shoot down incoming rockets, and it's designed to be used against short-range rockets. There's an analogous system that is designed to be used against medium and longer range rockets called David Sling, and that was used today, Israel says, to intercept a ballistic missile, which Hezbollah says it fired towards the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 intelligence base north of Tel Aviv, the same site that had attacked with the drone strike several weeks ago. But I'm talking about the Iron Dome, and each Iron Dome launcher can hold 20 interceptor missiles. These are called Tamir missiles. And Israeli media report that each interceptor missile costs between $70,000 and $100,000 per missile. And so if you think about that, if you have a launcher of 20 missiles and that goes off and each one is $100,000, am I doing my maths correctly? That's $2 million really per volley of these missiles. And the system is designed only to fire when its radar detects that the rockets are headed towards built-up areas or other valuable assets, presumably like military bases or industry and so on. And Israel claims that the system is 90 to 95% effective. But I'm not going to go into that. That's not something I have enough information to really contest or to prove. What I want to talk about is the Iron Dome in the context of a prolonged war of attrition. So in that sense, it clearly has limitations. And a major one is the availability of the interceptor missiles. And over the last few days, we have seen Israel firing huge numbers of interceptor missiles, almost certainly hundreds per day. And we can discern this by looking at the videos that are coming out of Israel that are being posted on Telegram channels and that are being, filmed just by ordinary Israelis on the ground, watching what's going on in the sky. And let's just show one to give an example. So you see there that I didn't count them precisely, but that's probably at least 20 little blasts, which each one represents a Tamir interceptor. So you're probably looking at about $2 million worth of smoke in that video. And there are just tons of these videos all over, coming from all over the Galilee and all over, northern Israel. So, if you add it up, you easily get to hundreds of interceptors. And this is only, 3-4 days into this. So it's very likely that one of Hezbollah's strategies is to try to exhaust Israel's supply of interceptor missiles by firing just constant barrages of these very cheap 𝐄𝐥𝐞 missiles, and perhaps other types of missiles that Jon knows more about. But the basic 𝐄𝐥𝐞 would be the one that they're probably firing a lot, these sort of rocket artillery missiles. So the question then, if we're looking at a very prolonged war of attrition, is how many Tamir interceptors does Israel have? Well, that number is not publicly available, but we have seen Israeli experts and military people express concern about the number of available interceptors and that the rate of production can't keep up with the rate of firing. So, for example, in June, NPR, the US government-backed radio network, reported, quote, "A new conflict in Lebanon would challenge Iron Dome in another way. Israel does not have an infinite number of interceptor missiles in its stockpile. And they quote 𝐄𝐥𝐿 𝐈𝐧𝐭𝐫𝐿, a retired Israeli general, as saying that since October 7th, and remember this is in June, Israel had fended off attacks from every direction. As it has done so, it has been expending missiles faster than they can be manufactured, end quote. And then they quote this General 𝐈𝐴𝐵𝐺 saying, after 8 months of thousands of interceptions, it's a big challenge. And while we do not know how many interceptors Israel has, we know that they are not being produced very quickly. They are made by Raytheon, which is a US weapons company, and Rafael, which is an Israeli weapons company. And in February, these companies announced a joint project to build interceptors at a new factory in the United States, starting in 2026. And they estimate that the factory will be able to produce up to 2,000 Tamir interceptors per year, and that not all of these would be destined for Israel. And 2,000 sounds like a lot, but that's easily the number of interceptors that Israel could be firing in just a couple of days in case of an even bigger escalation. The NPR article also quotes various Israeli experts saying that Hezbollah has learned to exploit other vulnerabilities in the Iron Dome system. This includes using anti-tank missiles that fly very low to the ground and that can evade the Iron Dome radar, and destroying the Iron Dome launchers themselves. And we've actually seen that happening in the past few months in some of the videos that Jon has shown us in his resistance reports. And in October, the publication Israel Defense reported that Israel was entering the war on Gaza with a large stockpile of interceptors for Iron Dome that it had built up over time, but that once these stocks run low, it would be difficult to substantially increase the rate of production. The article says that in case Israel starts to run low on stocks, it has contingency plans to reduce the size of the areas that are being protected, which would increase the risk to civilians. The article states, quote, producing an interceptor takes a long time. There are thousands of interceptors on the production line at any given moment, with each batch at a different stage in the process. Normally, there are purchase orders and a known schedule for delivery. When there is an emergency situation, such as the one the State of Israel found itself in on Saturday, October 7th, there is a need to advance supplies. However, there is no magic in the defense industry. An interceptor production procedure includes hundreds or thousands of different suppliers in the world, starting from the raw materials to components such as screws or bolts. The suppliers are also forced to switch from routine to emergency production, and this is not always possible in an immediate time frame. And in 2021, retired Israeli Colonel Yossi Langotsky wrote in the Israeli newspaper Ma'ariv that Israel would not be able to rely on Iron Dome in case of a major confrontation with Lebanon. He wrote, quote, the cost of each Iron Dome firing is over $100,000. He's referring to the individual interceptors. And sometimes 2 missiles are used to intercept a single target. Hence, preparing a sufficient inventory of missiles for Iron Dome to deal with the missile threat will require many billions of dollars. Because of this, the IDF, the Israeli military, will be able to field a limited number of missiles that will be sufficient to operate the dome systems for a limited period of time only. In other words, the Iron Dome system will be able to help mainly against Hamas missiles, but much less against Hezbollah's missiles and Iran's missiles, which are from the more sophisticated league. End quote. All of this raises the question of how well and how long Israel can fare in a prolonged war of attrition in which Hezbollah has tens, perhaps hundreds of thousands of these Katyusha rockets. Also of note is that the issue of producing enough air defense missiles is not unique to the Iron Dome system. the US is facing a severe shortage of Patriot air defense missiles because it has been using them up in Ukraine much faster than it can produce them. And there's lots of reporting on that. It also faces a similar problem in the Red Sea, where the US Navy has been firing off far more missiles than it can afford to expend to try to defeat the naval blockade imposed by Yemen's Ansarullah movement. And at the root of this is that you have a US military industrial complex that is geared to producing small volumes of very expensive and complex weapon systems, which produce huge profits for arms companies. This is an observation that is made very often by Brian Boletic of the New Atlas, who analyzes some of the issues related to Patriot and other systems in detail. The US weapons industry is not geared to producing large quantities of simple, effective weapons. And he makes the contrast with Russia, whose arms industry can churn out very large numbers of weapons that are effective, simple, and essentially inexhaustible in terms of artillery shells and so on. And we've heard about the very cheap drones that are based on the Iranian-made Shahed drone. And in a sense, and I'd like to hear what Jon thinks about this, it's similar to the strategy that we've seen from Hamas over the past year, going back much longer, which was to build really simple weapons that they could have in very large numbers, like the Yasin, that they can put into the hands of all their fighters. There's kind of an analogy there. So I just wanted to look into that because I was very curious about the Iron Dome, and I wanted to understand what the implications of a prolonged war of attrition would be.
Thanks, Ali. That was really helpful. Asa and Jon, Jon, what are your reactions to that, and what it means to, in terms of the attrition?
Hezbollah has the rocket capacity to fire, like the Israeli planners believe, 5,000 rockets in a day. In Gaza, during the operation of October 7th, they fired 5,000 rockets in an hour. So to be real about what is possible for a group that has 200,000 rockets of this nature, if you want to overwhelm the Iron Dome, they could point all of their launchers at a particular moment to a target, and Iron Dome simply doesn't have the number of the number of missiles, interceptors, as you rightly described, to handle an attack like that. And that is something that is hanging over this battle. 300 rockets is significant. Israel can handle 300 rockets, but there was still major landings of those rockets, strikes on the bases that they intended to hit. There is a considerable amount of range for expanding the airstrikes versus rocket war, and it's very much in question that Israel's Iron Dome or David Sling can handle this properly. The next level up of rockets that Hezbollah can fire require David Sling interceptions, not Iron Dome. And David Sling, as you said, has the same problems of generating enough interceptor missiles. And those missiles are closer to $1 million a pop. The Patriot missile systems that will have to be deployed for the top level of Hezbollah's missile arsenal, those are more like $2 and $3 million an interceptor. There's a math equation at some point on a war of attrition, of a constant rocket war of attrition, that simply there is no answer for Israel to that. At some point, the rockets will not be able to be intercepted and they will be hitting Israel. What stage in that war, how quickly we get to that stage, and using them using all of these interceptors up on military bases is going to leave their population vulnerable for total war should that open up. So Israel's been able to keep their home front sort of calm by this. They lie about it, but the effectiveness of the Iron Dome, that 90 to 95% number, is that number is not real. We know it from the Iranian attack, True Promise, in April, that it's not. They said 99% in that one, but we have numbers. There's studies on Iron Dome that show that the interception rate is not nearly what they claim, and they always are able to say the interceptions that didn't happen they always say happened in an open area. That is not always the case, and a lot of times those open area rockets would be normally intercepted. So we're seeing what would happen when they're hitting the open areas, and it's classified how many batteries they have, how many of these Iron Dome launch batteries that they have. There's unknown, but we know there's a shortage of missiles for their interceptors. And so they're going into this battle with Hezbollah not ready for this. And this is an interesting story because on October 7th, Yoav Gallant, he wanted to invade simultaneously Gaza and Lebanon. And Netanyahu was threatened by the U.S. And there's a story that came in Foreign Affairs by Amos Harrell, where on the day of October 7th, the meeting that needed to happen between Gallant and Netanyahu to make a war in the north was postponed, literally blocked by locking the doors at the defense at Al-Aqsa, the defense campus, to literally lock Gallant out to not be able to access the meeting that day, which allowed October 7th to pass. And then that window of opportunity for invading the north was sort of put on the back burner. Gallant and Netanyahu have hated each other long before this war. But there's people in the Israeli military who want to invade Lebanon. And there's people in the Israeli military that say invading Lebanon will destroy our country. So there's not even unanimity within their own society for something that is barreling towards an existential issue for them.
And now Netanyahu and Gallant are just openly falling out in public, politically within Israel.
Yeah, and last week, of course, I mean, was it a week ago? It's just like time is so warped these days. But Netanyahu was publicly leaking that he was going to fire Gallant,
right?
Because Gallant was on record, as we've reported, saying, I don't think we're able to attack Lebanon, basically. And now
he started changing his tune. Yeah,
he changed his tune. So I mean, just as Netanyahu wants to keep the war and the genocide in Gaza going in order to save his own skin, there's an element of that. It's not the whole story, but it's certainly part of it. At the moment the war stops, the government and the coalition is far more vulnerable than it's been at any time since October 7th. And there's an element of this massacre in Lebanon being about saving Yoav Gallant's job. Again, that's not the whole story, but I do think it's part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like what you were saying earlier in the stream, Ali, that there's, there's a distinct possibility that even though it's not in their interest, they could end up invading anyway, which, we kind of similar in some ways dynamic to what we saw with the ground invasion of Gaza. They were being told by the Americans not to do it, and yet they still sort of talked themselves into doing it. And
the Americans didn't stop them. Incredibly important, because remember that the Americans have been very loud. The United States have been very loud the past couple of days saying, we're against a ground invasion. We don't think that's the way to bring the captives. We don't think that's the way to bring the Israeli settlers back to the north. Of course, the real reason is that the Pentagon, the United States, the hard-headed military people know Israel is unlikely to prevail in such a war against Hezbollah, just as Israel was completely defeated in 2006 when they invaded. But the US is saying, oh, we're against it and we're trying to stop it. But they said that about Rafah, and it happened. Yeah. And Jon is still showing us videos of the resistance fighting the Israeli invaders in Rafah. So, there's the fact that the US says they're against it, if anything, is a reason to believe it will happen.
And they've achieved none of their primary goals in the Gaza Strip. They have killed
none of their stated goals. None of
their stated goals. They've killed far more of their prisoners of war and detainees than they have rescued. And it's with Lebanon, the whole calculation changes once there's a ground invasion. If there's a ground invasion, we hope there won't be. But Hassan Nasrallah said in his speech last week that we wish that they invade. And I don't think that's bluster. I think they will have the advantage. They will have the home advantage, and the Israelis' advantage that you mentioned earlier, of it, in the air war, the technological superiority just vanishes overnight.
Well, there's a lot to keep our eyes on. There's too much. It's very overwhelming. What can we expect from Iran and the rest of the axis of resistance? I mean, we saw, just in the last hour, I guess, a strike on Eilat, I think you said, from the Iraqi resistance.
That's the initial reporting.
The initial reports,
I haven't been able to follow up.
Yeah. But where is Iran in all of this? I believe Khomeini is speaking today, or maybe tomorrow. Where does this go?
I mean, that's a good question, because the new president, and we talked about the new president Pezeshkian a couple of weeks ago when we had Mohammed Marandi on. Spoke at the UN, and it was spoke at the United Nations, the General Assembly, and also gave an interview with Al Jazeera. I only watched excerpts of that, but it was a very conciliatory speech saying, look, we don't want war with anyone. And some are interpreting that to say Iran's not going to do anything. I'm not sure that's right, because Iran's position has always been we don't want war with anyone. We're not looking for a war. But at the same time, it's been now, was it July 31st that Ismail Haniyeh was murdered by Israel in Tehran? And it's now we're on the threshold of October, and the promised retaliation hasn't come. The Iranians said it will come. It might take longer than people expect, but at the same time, there's a lot of uncertainty about what Iran might do. But you do see in Hezbollah's behavior this sort of restraint, this very measured escalation. And so the fact that Iran is not jumping in is not necessarily out of tune with that. And Israel looks just absolutely that, their calculation may be Israel is destroying itself. Yes, people are taking terrible losses in Lebanon, not as bad as it would be in it would be far worse in a full-scale war, as we've seen in Gaza, where tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, are dead. So their calculation may be let Israel destroy itself. I don't know, but I think there's a lot of uncertainty about that. But they have capabilities that are in store. That much we know.
Yeah. And I think I said Khomeini, who, of course, died a long time ago. I meant Khamenei. But also, yeah, it's you know, the rest of the axis of resistance. I mean, I think it's important to also, and John, maybe you can talk about this, where Yemen stands in this. What has Yemen been up to the last week, since the attacks on Lebanon by Israel, and what, you know, what kind of leverage do they have in terms of, you know, the Red Sea and the economic blockade, you know, as this war of attrition kind of grinds on?
They've launched a few missiles. They launched a couple of cruise missiles and drones. And there was some talk about a ballistic missile being launched and intercepted that didn't have the strongest. Again, we got military censor in Israel, makes it difficult. But the capacity to land that Palestine 2 ballistic missile into the kitchen of Tel Aviv is an indication that is possible. If there's a number of those missiles in their capability, in their stocks, those could be used to great effect. And that's what happens when you make it a regional war. You can make it fire. You can have fire coming from all sides on Israel. And the way that we remember the Ansar Allah hit Tel Aviv with their drone was they flew it out over the sea and came in from the west. So you're getting hits from the north, south, east, and west. And that keeps your air defenses tied up because it keeps the batteries spread out, right? That keeps their Iron Dome and David Sling's batteries, the system that launches the interceptors. You have to spread them out. You have to put them in strategic places. You can't have them all in one place, and you can't have places with no coverage. So if you are to press the issue by firing consistently from those other fronts, you have the possibility to harass, I think is the word, but harass Israeli forces. I'm not sure.
And tie them down.
Tie them down and then have the attacks by Hezbollah be more effective. I'm not sure personally. Like, I don't know if we need to speculate, but I don't know if Iran missed their window here, because I think that Iran very strongly wants to avoid a regional war. And I agree. Think that the fight with Hezbollah has turned into an expanded war that now Gaza is fighting and now Hezbollah is fighting. And Iran doesn't want a regional war. And Hezbollah doesn't want a war either. They're very disciplined. Their position isn't, we want our country to be destroyed by American bombs that are given to Israel as gifts to drop on our people. So they have been very careful about this. And I think that that's where the ground war comes in. If Nasrallah is saying, you know, come in on the ground, fight us on the ground, because a standoff battle, which could happen between Hezbollah and Israel with rockets and airstrikes, can go on for many, many months. A ground invasion is how, and we'll remember from 2006, there was an air war, rocket war component, and then Israel invaded. And when Israel invaded, they got hammered and they got trapped, and they wanted and they begged for a ceasefire. In Canada, our prime minister was one of the ones saying, no ceasefire, no ceasefire. Israel was trying to get no ceasefire all through the
Tony Blair.
Tony Blair. And then they went into Bint Jbeil. They got hammered, and all of a sudden they're looking back going, you guys want to hand us one of those ceasefires now, and we'll sign it immediately. And they signed it immediately. And then they sent, after signing it, they sent hundreds of thousands of cluster bombs and rained them all over South Lebanon as a petty but murderous way of responding to the fact that they knew they couldn't beat them in a ground force. Their ground invasion in that war was mostly a rescue operation. The first invading force got pinned down, soldiers were killed, and then the rescue operations to save them came under attack, and they needed more forces to protect the rescue operation, and it just spiraled from there.
And I do think, I mean, thinking about the question regarding Iran and the axis of resistance, that Iran is playing a very long game. And I think it can be very frustrating for people, because when we see so much criminality, so much murder, so much genocide, so much deliberate targeting of civilians in the most purely evil way that Israel is doing, with the full support of the Joe Biden, Kamala Harris administration and the Keir Starmer government in the UK and the Olaf Scholz government in Germany and so on. People want to see a response to that. And I don't mean they want to see a response against Israeli civilians. They want to see a response that they would consider legitimate, such as, big missiles raining down on the Israeli defense headquarters, for example, or whatever it may be. But I think that they may be making a calculation that we can win a war of attrition. They're looking at this over decades, whereas Netanyahu's time frame is weeks and months. Can I get through this week? Can I get through the US election? Can I get through to January when the next president is inaugurated? And they don't look at it that way. They're looking at this in terms of a long game, and they need to preserve as much of their resources intact for the day when it becomes inevitable to use it. That may well be the strategy that they're taking, and I think that you see that in sort of the very clear but measured escalation that Hezbollah is doing, saying we're going to hit hard, we're willing to take losses, but we're not going to rush into a situation where it ends up with Lebanon destroyed, if we can win another way. And the other way is through attrition, with Israel, in free fall. That may be the better strategy, but it takes longer, and it's tough. But when you don't have, and recall that speech that Nasrallah made a few weeks ago, when he emphasized, in a way I hadn't heard him emphasize before, that we don't have the same weapons as Israel. You may look at us and see all these incredible feats, but that doesn't mean we're on a par with Israel in terms of quantity and even quality of weapons. But as Jon said, when I raised this one or two shows ago, they are equal or superior in terms of determination and ability to win a war with Israel. But
manpower.
But the way they have to win that war is different, and it may be on a different time scale.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth noting Israel's goals in this war that they articulated the other day: to evacuate the south, to use as chips to return for the return of their people, move the Radwan forces, the special forces, off the border, degrade Hezbollah, and split Gaza and Lebanon into two separate fronts. They're not moving Radwan forces off the border. Degrading Hezbollah is a bit of a vague term that maybe they could do, but they're not going to split off Gaza and Hezbollah either. So they're setting themselves up for a road where there's no off-ramp that I see coming. So, and Hezbollah's goals, I think, are much more simple. They're to stick with Gaza, to defend Lebanon, which yesterday they announced, and to escalate without total war. They don't want total war. And anyone who's lived through a war doesn't want total war. They're brutal.
Oh, well, I think that's a good place to leave it for this week. There's obviously so much that is happening, as I said, days or decades. But we will be back next week with whatever happens next. Let's take a quick look at the Electronic Intifada website. During the news report, I highlighted one of our features by Assam Nabi, but there are many more features to check out. Ali, did you want to highlight some of the most recent ones?
Well, We just published one by Bassem Naeem, who is commenting on the mooted appearance of Netanyahu at the UN. It's unclear if he's going to go. And so that's a very interesting piece. The piece by Ghada Msabbe, which we also just published today, is really a difficult piece to read. But, you know, this piece talks about children being taken to the Sde Timan, young women and minors being taken to the Sde Timan concentration camp and torture camp. And there are other reports of this, but this is one particular story written by Ghada. And you'll recall last week I mentioned the piece by Tamara Nassar, which is sort of a really incredibly comprehensive overview of just the utter horrors at Sde Timan. This is an individual story, and it's really important that these stories come out as difficult as they are. And our colleagues who are covering really important beats, let's say, if we look at the some of in the blog columns on the side, our colleague David Cronin, who is keeping a laser focus on the complicity of the EU. He's had a couple of pieces just in the last few days about European complicity in this genocide. In the last couple of shows, we've talked about particularly British complicity. We always talk about American complicity, but it's much more than that. And so David keeps an eye on that. And our colleague Michael Brown keeps an eye on US media complicity and genocide enabling. And he has a piece that he has just published about CNN's Jake Tapper, who we, of course, have spoken about in the context of his role in disseminating the mass rapes hoax. But Michael Brown is keeping an eye on how Jake Tapper continues to spread Israeli genocidal propaganda. And then, of course, we have incredible pieces from our writers in Gaza, including, and very relevant to today's discussion, students of the late Refaat Alareer, like, for example, just one of the pieces on the front page is by Khalid al-Gershelli, who is a former student of Refaat and is in Gaza trying to survive this genocide. And he has that piece, A Long Day's Journey to Reunite in Displacement. So there is just so much, and we're so proud to be able to bring this work to people and to share it with the world. And we ask you to share it with your friends, your family, your networks, on your social media. And to say again, thank you to everyone for all the support you give us that enables us to do this work. That support comes in many ways. It comes in the form of the wonderful messages and emails we receive all the time, the wonderful comments that I'm seeing streaming by as we're on this live stream, very kind words. It comes in the form of sharing this work, and it also comes in the form of the donations you make that help us pay for all of it, for everything you see here on this live stream, on the website. And we're particularly grateful to everyone who makes a donation. We're particularly grateful to those who have made, set up monthly donations, whether it's for $10 a month or $25 or $50 or more. And people who want to do that can do that. They can find the Donate Now link on the website. Or if you're watching on YouTube, we're still on YouTube.
For now.
Yeah. In the description, you can find links where you can do that. And so thank you to everyone for all the support. It's incredible.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, thank you. And of course, I want to send a special thanks to brilliant Tamara Nassar behind the scenes, directing and producing the live streams and the standalone podcasts, as well as her own brilliant reporting and writing. And thank you to Maureen Claire Murphy, our senior editor, for pre-production and writing, and to Michael Brown for a lot of editing behind the scenes of reports and background info that we deliver here on this live stream, as well as all the editing that he does of features and blog posts on EI. Everyone at the Electronic Intifada, all the editors behind the scenes, Ellie Gerzon for the social media videos. Thank you so much, Ellie. And Ali, John, Asa, thank you as well. And we'll be back next week. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.